Hello, everybody. Welcome. We are here. Earlier this year, I gave a talk about the idea of experimental councils, and I was very ambitious. I really only had like 10 minutes to do it, so I really didn't get to everything that I wanted to cover. So I want to do it again. Before I go on, I'm going to start sharing my screen so I can show you the different things that I'm looking at, and I'm going to collate everything, like all the web pages that I go to. I'm going to gather together the links, and I'll put a post about that up on my Substack. So that's what you'll see in just a second, because I'm going to share the screen to allow. Okay, so everything is happening correctly, I believe. So this is my Substack. It's a repository of a lot of writing. I've done a lot of work. Um, it's still a little bit all over the place. I'm the kind of person who's still learning how to like work with talking to other people kind of thing. But that's what this is all about. So I actually have, I think, a supplement to my presentation that I gave a long time ago. So let's see here. Right here. So Misanthropocene and the Legacy of the Situationist International. So I was talking about Grimes because I'm very taken with this album called Misanthropocene. It's a concept album, in case you don't know what a concept album is. It has a sort of cohesive structure. It's also for me, it's in conversation with something called grand style. So that is also something which is in conversation with Friedrich Nietzsche, and so we're already off and running. So we're blending between pop culture. We're trying to, in that sense, I don't know if that's really relatable, but I mean the kind of stuff that I'm talking about can be applied to anything. And so the whole idea of forming an experimental council is to start with the things that you're passionate about, that you can connect with other people that you already know, and basically just sort of build up and make more rigorous and disciplined in your own way, you're interfacing with other people. And so basically the model of social change that we're looking at here is that we're going to have bubbling up, we're going to have multiple groups. And in a way, this has already happened, right? Because, groups have already formed. People are already sort of doing council type activities, sort of delegating, decision making, and taking action together, sort of taking part in social projects or something that none of us could accomplish by ourselves, but also unlocking new kinds of connection. So that's already happening, and that's already happening in all different walks of life. The problem is, of course, everybody thinks that they're enemies. So if you look into the lore that I have for Experimental Unit, you'll know that, it's defined as an emergency response and not a warfighting organization. So basically what my vision, at least the way I'm interested in running the game right now, is that I'm not fundamentally against anybody. Like, I don't denounce anybody. I basically look at it in terms of, as they say in sort of relational dynamics, can we make it, instead of you versus me, can we make it you and me versus the problem? So what's the problem? I guess that's sort of what, in a way, everybody needs to define that for themselves, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. I'm just trying to explain why this is called what it is. So I was really influenced and inspired by Misanthropocene. I think it's related to grand style. And again, Friedrich Nietzsche, just in the sense of, creating excellent culture, instead of focusing on being negative or saying that something shouldn't have happened or shouldn't be happening. I mean, I think it's fine for us to try and influence each other. I call that right. There's something called an influence operation, which, I don't know, I guess so. Anyway, like an information operation is a concept that for me, it operates in war world, so I mean, an influence operation is something that you could do within a context of war, but it also is just anything, you know, like educating a child, you know, the most wholesome stuff could be construed also as influence. So therefore, I think it's a very important term. But so even as much as I might try to influence you, it's not coming out of a place where I think that you're my enemy. You know, like I think that, you know, there's something about you that makes it to where, you know, I'm just against you, and that has to be. I think it's more like we're committed to different things, but the more that we investigate the things that we're committed to and educate ourselves about them and are willing to enter into open and vulnerable, and also in specifically in my terms, like cross culturally syncretic and constructive cultural expression, like if we can build cultural bridges, you know, like that can make a big difference. Anyway, so Misanthropocene is basically an example of grand style. It's I've thought about this for a long time before. It's not like Misanthropocene awakened all my interests. It's more like I actually was looking into misanthropy. You know, I was looking into misanthropy and you know, the Anthropocene, and you know, I thought of the same pun. You know, misanthropocene. It's a we live in a time which is not just defined by so-called human activity. And I mean, you can look at that in terms of Afro-pessimism and the term human. But there's just a lot of criticisms of the term human. Human is basically a really limited term. Anyway, that's a real bone to pick that I have with, you know, Claire-Elise Boucher. Yeah, people talk about humanity all the time. I think is misguided. Anyway, I was looking this stuff up, so just to let you know, I was into the concepts of it, and I was like, "There's no way I thought of that pun first." And then I found this, and I was like, "Oh, Misanthropocene is about to be amazing," and indeed, it's my favorite album. So, what's going on with Misanthropocene? So, in terms of like a grand style, how has that worked out? And yeah, obviously there's a lot of, I've already talked a little bit in previous videos about controversies related. I'll get into them if I have time, but like that's not the focus of this video. So just so you know, I'm aware of that and I'm happy to engage about those things. So this is the fan page for Misanthropocene. And here is basically what I'm trying to show you. So one of the key things, and this is one of the things that I wanted to get to, it's over here somewhere. You know, so over here, you know, this is what I was setting up to talk about with Misanthropocene. But something that I guess I didn't get to is that in the lyrics to New Gods. So I like the album, it's fine, but a way that I've put it is that, you know, New Gods as a song is what makes it a world historical album. You know, like for me, it doesn't really matter. Like it's like what constitutes a great work of art is subjective. It doesn't, it's just, I'm saying in a way I want it to be the case, right? That in 50 years or like in whatever amount of time, you know, people will look back and Misanthropocene will be like a keystone piece of art, you know, but there will be a lot. To be fair, there will be a lot of like really, really important pieces of art. But anyway, the reason why I think this one's so important is basically because of the line, you know, only brand new gods can save me. So it's basically positing this idea of new gods. And so I think that Grimes or whatever is pretty much, I don't know if they're like on record talking about how, you know, the new gods are supposed to be artificial intelligence. I know that that's what Miss Boucher, or I want to stop saying that because I don't want to gender people, but basically C or whatever, you know, this Grimes person that we're talking about has basically said, you know, new gods, you could think about it as like artificial intelligences or, you know, new kinds of beings. I'm basically thinking about it almost like we can be the new gods. And so when I'm thinking of, you know, smash cut back to, you know, this term of the council, right? There are so many, I don't know, connotations of this word. I wonder if there's like a simple one. Yeah. So like there's so much that goes into this, but think a council is basically a group of people who are, I don't know if they're important, but it's like people who are making a decision. They're very important to each other. They're having important conversations, right? They're structuring social reality in some sense, at least for themselves, right? So so I want to compare that, right, to a pantheon. So it's also a place, but maybe there's just a lot. I'm basically thinking of. I thought a pantheon was like a group of gods, right? Am I confused here? What I'm thinking of is, like the Greek pantheon, or is like that just so. Oh, sorry, this is the very first one. Funnily enough. Anyway, so this is what I'm talking about. So comparing a council to a pantheon, right? But this is part of my deeper philosophical interest in like interrogating or basically investigating the supposed distinction between the divine and the mundane. So like, what are the stakes supposed to be about the question of whether or not we are gods? I think this opens up a lot of relevant political things. If, like, for example, as I was talking about before, Grimes is in hot water, and like the whole world is in hot water, right? Because of the influence of Nazism, which is also, of course, again, tied to Nietzsche. And so this idea of the Übermensch, right? This idea of the Übermensch, right, is related to this in the sense that, like, if we are the new gods, it's sort of like we are Super Saiyan or whatever, right? And so but the basic idea of experimental council is to embrace that sort of ethos, but then to basically say that this is one of the protocols that I made for experimental unit, but like the point of being in the world and being amazing, and like the point is really everybody's amazing, right? Everybody has genius, right? And so that's sort of an intervention that I want to make into Nietzsche or whatever, sort of like it's appreciating this drive toward greatness or whatever, leave the past behind and like, aim for the heavens or whatever. It's like, I'm with it, but I also think what makes things great is their ability to reach people and also to just make the world more beautiful, which basically for me is a political horizon of, it's related to cosmopolitanism. There's a reason why I think I really like Baudrillard. Baudrillard's one of my main theoretical influences. Of course, I'm drawing here from Debord. I got into Debord first, but immediately got into Baudrillard, and this is like 15 years ago now. So that was a long time ago. But anyway, Baudrillard, right. But so Baudrillard, because he started as a Marxist and then left the tradition. I was never really a Marxist, but, in terms of the ideals, it's like, oh, we should have a world where, everybody can be included and everybody can have a nice time and everybody can have enough, and things of this nature, as opposed to like, oh, we have a special group of, just the people who matter. And, we're just going to protect ourselves and to hell with everybody else. I don't think that's correct. I also think it doesn't work out. I think that we basically have to deal with the distrust dynamics that are endemic to all social groups. So, I mean, this is what I put under the heading of Hobbesian trap. I'm trying to get more people talking about this. But so basically, we face the problem even in family, right? How many of us come from dysfunctional families, or, how many of us have experienced toxic relationships where people are hurting each other? What's really tragic is sometimes we hurt each other without even intending to, but then sometimes we do intend to hurt each other. And, bad things happen, So with the Hobbesian trap, so this is again very relevant to the idea of a council, right? Because look at what happened to Hegelian Egro Council, right? This is another thing, obviously, which is I'm in conversation with. But I mean, I was talking about experimental council months before I'd ever heard of this idea, but it's okay. Like, what happened with the Hegelian Egro Council so far, right, is that, this was a really cool thing. People were excited about it. Of course, some people were clowning on it, whatever, it's the internet. But then basically, like, one of the people quit, right? So, like, So the problem basically is, again, these distrust dynamics. So I don't know anything about the specifics of that situation. That's not the point here. I'm not here to like gossip about that or whatever. I don't really know anything whatsoever. But anyway, in terms of the distrust, and especially because, these things are arising out of anyway, there's a lot. But regardless of whatever political tradition it's arising out of, the distrust expresses itself in like, oh, you're secretly that other political ideology that's evil, right? And so this is a way of, bringing this up, and the idea that the worst enemy is the internal enemy. There's that, and then there's like the true enemy is within. I don't know. Enemy within. There's something about that. Maybe, oh yeah, Kikero maybe said something about it. We'll see. But I was also going to say something else that I already forgot. The enemy is within the gates. It is with our own luxury, our own folly, our own criminality that we have to contend. See, this is great. Anyway, so I mean, then the other thing that I would mention in this context is that it's not just about, right, that we can't even trust our friends, right? Because basically, I'm trying to keep an upbeat, persona about these very difficult things, right? Because this is where a sort of paranoid, and paranoid's a tough word because I don't even mean that it is irrational, right? That's not the way I think about things anyway. But like, you're not paranoid if they're all out to get you, right? But at the same time, it can make it impossible for us to actually connect with anybody because we don't know how to. We don't know how to navigate this situation where we can't really trust other people, no matter like how they present themselves. So we need to like express our investment, but basically be ready to be burned. Be open but vigilant. It's like it's a lot, and being vigilant is like being hyper vigilant, right? That's a part. It's like a response to emotional trauma or something. Anyway, so there's just a lot. I'm getting off track here, but all of this is directly relevant to the idea of you forming a council. So in terms of like what you're doing, like let's talk about inspirations for this, right? So again, maybe I can just stick over here because even just within Guy Debord, like Guy Debord mentions workers' councils in the book Society of the Spectacle. So like I got lent this book. So the reason why I read it when I was 17 or whatever is because I got lent it by a teacher in high school. Oh shoot. I was trying to show you the Wikipedia page. Yeah, so there's this. And then, so this is a lot about like media theory. There's also a lot about other philosophers. Like there's Hegel. There's a lot of stuff I am not qualified to try and hold your hand through or anything like that. But it's an interesting book. Still Marxist, right? So, I mean, Baudrillard, it has issues with the theoretical perspective of the spectacle, of Guy Debord, and so on. They were also both present together at, not necessarily together in the same room, but like they were both at Nanterre, which was a university in France in May 68, which is where it sort of popped off. So that's funny for Baudrillard. Anyway, Baudrillard was a professor, and Debord, I don't think he had an official position. They had an official position. Anyway, in the idea of the new gods, we have, do I get to it? Or sorry, in the, was it here? Guy Debord. Class of consciousness. Okay, so I didn't put it there. So basically I'm trying to show you where in the Society of the Spectacle, Guy Debord is talking about workers' councils. And so this is building off of the idea of council communism. But so this is one connotation of the word council, and it's also related to what we're doing here. You can also think about things like anarcho-syndicalism. It's basically talking about like bottom up, groups forming. So that's where it's similar. Although I also advocate that, you can have overlapping councils. And like, that's also why like in the documents that I've created, as I was just saying, I don't think it's really possible to really build trust. And anybody who's just like, anybody who makes you feel bad for like not trusting them, that's immediately makes them even less trustworthy, right? So, I mean, I wrote a whole protocol. Like, I have protocols that are basically like, suggestions for common understandings when we come into discussion, right? Nobody's ever read them. I feel like Kurt Cobain at, MTV Live, where it's like, this is from our first record. Almost nobody bought it. Anyway, so Zero Trust Protocol is basically like you don't know what other people are going to do. So this is also related to things like Epictetus or Stoicism, or even just that serenity prayer, right? Give me the courage, the wisdom to it, whatever. We can accept the things that we can't control. But everything that other people do is something that we can't control. So if somebody else is going to go and be a chud, if somebody else is going to betray us, if somebody else is going to dox us, if somebody's going to kill us, right? It's not up to us. So like a big part of the soul force that goes into being a great artist is being okay with that and like accepting the gravity of the situation and accepting the potential sacrifice that might be called, like the fact that people might punish you for expressing yourself. Like you really have to accept that and be able to move forward. I guess that you could think about it as a deeper sense of trust or something like that, or you're following your artistic vision or something. You're trusting yourself, right? Or you're trusting something, right? You're trusting, but it's not other people, right? It's not that other people are going to do what they say they're going to do, because as much as promises are magical, and in a way we can't go where we're going without promises, but at the same time, any given promise can fail, right? And also, I think that the best way for us to be trustworthy is to show up and sort of, this is funny because this term authenticity has been coming up recently, but I think it's a way to be authentic in the sense of like, we have to be upfront that we are taking a risk, because even as much as I say zero trust, but I have a whole other protocol right here called sacrificial transparency, which is basically that, the reason why we came here, or like, that's not a good way to put it. I don't want to posit too many things, but you could think about it similar to that. It's sort of like, in order to access some of the really good things about the world, you have to take a risk, right? And so anytime you're putting yourself out there, right, you're putting your neck on the line. When you're putting your neck on the line, your head could get cut off, right? That's what that means, right? And like that's happened to people, right? There were probably, I can't think of specific examples, but like there were people like in revolutionary France or whatever situation where people were like, you better stop or we're going to kill you. And they didn't stop. And maybe they killed them. Anyway, so that's just an example of sacrificial transparency. So it's sort of dueling banjos. But in terms of like in terms of these are all agreements or something. Anyway, this is just basically saying that, when, like, for example, like the people who made the Hegelian e-girl council, like if you associate with somebody else on the internet, like that is a sacrifice, right? Because you are now associated with their brand or whatever. And now it gets all complicated. I don't even know all about this, although I have my own opinions about the concepts involved, right? But, there's the infrared and there's the MAGA communists or whatever the fuck is going on, right? So like being associated with these people will like now lose you credibility or clout, whatever the fuck it is, reputation, right? So what we're talking about is like risks and sacrifices and, things like this associated with reputation. Because I mean, you can be associated with somebody and then they can go on and do something later that looks really bad, right? Or like, what if there's something in their past that comes to light and now that's like a whack situation. And now it's something you have to deal with. I mean, if you didn't know legitimately, you can always be like, whatever, and then distance yourself. But the point is, like, engaging with people comes with risk. And you can also think about this just in terms of meeting with people. You meet with somebody, now you're alone with them. They can kill you, right? Or you fall asleep around somebody. Like, do you have any idea how easy it is to, anyway. But the point is, like, we expose ourselves to risk. And this is a fundamental aspect of the world. I think it's in, I'm not gonna be able to pull this up right now, but it's in Plato's Republic, where he's talking about how the whole reason why we have this concept of justice is because people have to go to sleep. So you can't just, beat people up all the time and just, dominate them, because it's like you're going to have to fall asleep. And if everybody hates you really that much, like they can just kill you in their sleep, right? Or in your sleep, right? So that's why we have to come up with these sort of social understandings. And that's where all these concepts that we deal with come from. So I have a term in development called conceptual churn. It's basically an idea we shouldn't get too attached to any one concept, and we should be cycling through them and working through like the deadlocks that make it to where like we bottom out on some words. But anyway, in terms of the councilism, so yeah, I'm getting carried away over here. We almost want another version of this. Because I also mentioned, there's another article where I mentioned, oh dear. Yeah, here's another one where I mentioned, this was supposed to be specifically about councils, but I got completely off topic. But so here were some more inspirations. Because as I mentioned, council communism is an inspiration. So council communism, you're basically forming decision-making structures of people themselves. Maybe but in Marxism, right, it's thought about as laborers, right? Like you're organizing a factory or something like this. I think there also have been people who have done things like, I think I was reading a book by somebody who was involved, in something like a homemakers council, like a people who, like in an apartment block, like the people who are usually staying home and taking care of stuff. You can also form a council there, like pool babysitting or whatever, like, or childcare or whatever, in particular, council communism doesn't work with like normal political parties, and it also doesn't work with like trade unions. So like the idea of like these big unions, like the idea is that they can also sort of become captured, right, from within the whatever troubling thing. Of course, we're dealing here with communism. So capitalism. The people who own a lot of things and machines, they're all getting together and they're conspiring for themselves and messing everybody else up. And so you don't want to work with things that are captured by. So this is, Marxism is a war ideology, right? The whole idea of class struggle it's a euphemism for class war, right? And so in terms of the subject, right? You're supposed to you are important because you are a member of a class, right? So that's the sort of thing that I reject. I also reject things like you're important because you're part of you have a certain ethnicity or a nation or a language. So I'm pretty politically homeless, but that's cool. We're figuring it out. So what I'm basically advocating for that I think would be helpful for people is that we should all take ourselves more seriously as like decision makers. Like the things that we do are important, and like we should counsel with other people. We should get their advice on what we're doing, and other people can use our advice because regardless of how smart you are, or, whether you're a good person to talk to, like we're all missing input. So basically. I was thinking not just of workers' councils. So that's where we're exploding out of, right, the Marxist conception. So just in terms of some some things like against, I don't know. I go back to this from Jean Baudrillard all the time. He's basically saying, if one day political imagination, political will, and political demand hope to rebound, they will have to take into account the radical abolition of the antiquated and artificial distinction between left and right. So, and then this is also a very strong statement that I think a lot of more radical people would already agree with, even if they think they're communists or whatever. But anyway, so Le Pen is the one who makes up the new political scene as if everyone else had agreed to destroy what's left of democracy. Perhaps to produce the retrospective illusion that it actually used to mean something, right? So, the whole idea of like, well, what political tradition are you fighting? Like, what do you think has actually been going on for the past several hundred years is like pretty important. But so my point of view is basically to be very cynical, but non-judgmental. So basically, like, I think laws are a lie. I think norms in general are lies. Like just the ways in which we are inculcated with concepts. I think at a very distributed and sometimes at a very centralized level, there's social engineering, which goes on in order to like keep people's thoughts confined, right? But, I don't blame the people who do that. Like, I basically understand, like, the problem is if you just have billions of people who with nothing to coordinate them, then they'll start fighting. And like people don't necessarily come from, this stage of wisdom where, we can avoid that. So like, yeah, like I basically think that we need to earn our way, or like basically do the work basically required in order to have a better social structure where we don't have to rigidly attach ourselves to words in order to understand ourselves. We don't have to glom onto existing political hierarchies that just seem like they're good enough or whatever. So in order to be able to do that, we need to be building up our own. I mean, you can talk about power. It's not really power over anybody, though. It's really, we need to be developing our capacities and discovering them, like discovering capacity or whatever that we don't even know we had, right? Fulfilling our potential, like magical Christmas land, right? Like we need to be excited to be ourselves and be growing and stuff. And then the whole idea of a council is that people are doing this together. And so that's where I think like a council, it doesn't have to be something really serious and like, what's your political like what's your grand strategy, right? Like in a way, a book club is a kind of council. If you're deciding what book to do next, right, you're making a decision together. But what I'm trying to get us to see is that these things are connected. So that's where I don't know if I'm getting to everything I wanted to, but there's something called like a total social fact. I don't know if I can. Oh, funny. I'm definitely going to be abusing this concept. But it's basically others, all the people of society. I mean, it's this, but it's also something which basically it involves all the different concepts. Like we'll break things into economic, political, religious, cultural, artistic. I mean, there's the overlap. But the point is like a total social fact is something that combines all the different domains of life. So when I'm talking about council, like sometimes I've thought about doing like an artist's council, or again, you could organize anybody to do anything, right? But in a way, it's funny, the word council can get in the way. I've also heard people mention, the term affinity group. That's also a good way of thinking about it. So everything that I'm doing with Experimental Unit is basically thinking about what's interesting about like affinity groups, how we understand each other, what can our capacities be. And so a lot of the more, esoteric or whatever, all these like philosophical ideas for me have to do with the fact that, again, circling back to like, what is there for us to do? And I already mentioned influence operations. This is information operations. But, there's this concept, right? It exists, influence operations. So, I mean, we can do influence operations. We can be trying to change people's minds. And like when it comes to like the idea of violence and nonviolence, that for me, as I said before, the organizational idea that I have is about emergency response and not warfare. But it's important to me that there are things that I would definitely advocate that other people might understand as military or like in that heading, basically. So if you're thinking about influence operations, right, like you're basically talking about trying to change people's minds. And I'm interested, like this maybe subversion means that you like have to be using deception. So I guess not. But so like depending on your point of view, right, the kind of thing that I'm talking about could be considered subversion or sedition or whatever. But like that's where I don't care. That's where it's like in terms of because there's ahimsa, right? I mean, yeah, I'm not sure to say I'm not a good role model, but like I'm also interested in continuing to refine the way I behave. And this again goes back to this idea of greater jihad, which is basically that even as much as, if we're making councils, right, what are we doing? Like we want to coordinate our decision making in order to influence the broader world because we live, all these wars are going to kill us. And, whatever, we want to make our culture, right? But not our culture in the sense of like American culture. Like we're building our own culture as people, right? And then we can spread, we can grow our cultural influence. But anyway, in addition to, teaming our efforts, turning to the world, I think it's also important to think of what we're doing as this internal, like we're helping each other become better, right? And make choices for ourselves in terms of how we would like to curate ourselves in terms of the actions and the gestures that we perform. So just as much, so that reminds me of like self-criticism, right? In Maoism, you don't have to adopt. I don't. Yeah, I'm not doctrinaire in any form, but just the idea, not necessarily of like shaming and like, oh, I feel so bad because I made mistakes. But if you have somebody that you can talk to and basically tell like, oh, I did some things, it's like confession, right? You just can get things off your chest, and that's nice. And maybe you can get some advice so that if you really do want to be better, you can be. And even if you are just going to keep smoking and you are going to die about it, you can at least talk about it, and other people might find that fine enough. Anyway, Greater Jihad. So it's a continual. So even as much as like we're doing subversion, right? So for example, like I don't believe in nation states. I think we live in a time of the crisis of the nation state, and in a way, nation states never existed. This is back to Baudrillard talking about the illusion that democracy used to mean something. So right, democracy never meant anything. I don't care about that. Like, I'm not scandalized by the idea of like, democracy is dying. Like, miss me with that. Like, I don't care. Like, for me, that's a conceptual guardrail. That's the kind of thing people use because they're like, oh, we don't want to fall into totalitarianism. Like, that's not a reason for something. That's not a reason to believe in something. Acting like I believe in something just so other people don't get panicked and start killing other people is not a solid foundation, right, for social structures. So it's just like, anyway. So given that situation that we're in, I think speaking frankly and in a way, what Ben Zweibelson calls killing sacred cows, that's also not the most sensitive thing. But, like not even dispelling illusions, because it's so presumptuous for me to say like, here, I'm going to tell you the truth. But it's more so like, love involves challenge, right? Like if I really think that there's an issue with the way things are going, and I can still try and address that with a sense of urgency, especially as we're saying before, like this is an emergency response. So when I'm talking about emergency, I'm talking about, complex emergency, which is like a term from like the Department of Defense, right? Like this is like a serious concept where like a war can be included, right? So like say you have a war and then there's a hurricane and a pandemic like on top of that shit, right? Like that's what a complex emergency is. It's serious fucking business, right? But then you can also the concept of emergency is malleable enough that you can also talk about like a spiritual emergency. And so there's spiritual crisis, but like note, you can also say spiritual emergency. But like you can also talk about this in terms of like dark night of the soul, right? So on the one hand, like what we're talking about over here is like you got cities on fire, right? And people are dying, right? And like we don't know where the nuclear codes are or whatever, like shit's bad, right? But over here, like things are bad can be it can seem like smaller stakes. It reminds me of like people talking about movies, like after watching all the Marvel movies, like if you go see Good One, right? It's like such small stakes, right? It's not about the fate of the world. It's about people's relationship with each other. But that's the same. It's not actually less important because, again, like these are different fractal levels of the Hobbesian trap. It's fundamentally the same problem over and over again, where we're encountering somebody else and we're afraid of them. And also they're afraid of us. But the way that we act because that we're afraid of them makes them more afraid of us. And this keeps escalating. And then, in terms of like, oh, but some people really do hate each other. They're very judgmental. Like those kinds of things, I would basically explain as like we get hyper fixated and hyper focused, related to painful things. And we can find alternative ways of dealing with that rather than killing people. So basically like, say there's some people who are like, oh no, I need to conquer the world because that's what my father would have expected or whatever. Like people feel like they have to live up to. And I mean, a good one for me right here is, things like circumcision or female genital mutilation, right? Like I was just reading about that. It's so funny to me that, I mean, they are separate, different cases or whatever. Like in a way, female genital mutilation is worse than circumcision, but they're so similar. It's funny to me that that one is considered, you know, totally normal, and another one is considered, completely heinous. But I mean, there's plenty of people who also agree with that. But anyway, the idea that among, say, Jewish people or Muslim people or whoever else, feels like they have a religious, or they owe it to their family, right? Because people have been doing this for a long time. So there's a lot of emotional reasons why people might feel compelled to circumcise, their child or female, or cut, their whatever child they have. And so, like, being able to prevent that from happening, I think it's important to have more patience than just to say, oh, that's awful, you can't do that. Like, it's really important to be sensitive, or like to be responsive to, these deep entrenched cultural, reasons why we think we have to do things. Because in reality, like, those sorts of presuppositions are in all of us, and it happens in many different ways. There's many different ways that each of us, like, will harm other people because of that's just how we think people are supposed to be, right? And so unconsciously or whatever, we're trying to live up to some expectation that somebody that we understood was important, or somebody who hurt us or whatever. We're trying to live up to those expectations, and meanwhile we're like hurting other people. But we can find ways to overcome that. The issue is, oftentimes people will frame their perspective as objective. Like, I'm watching other people argue, and then I'm like, okay, well, obviously this person's the problem, right? So I'm going to come in and I'm going to, address my, and I'm going to, diagnose what's going on and give you all these. I think it's very important for us to have a lot of humility when we engage and intervene into these sorts of emotional things. Like, it's not like it's so simple just to figure out, like, oh, you're the fascist, or like, oh, you're a narcissist, or like, oh, like, whatever. Like, we have all these labels, and then it basically just means, like, whose fault is it? But it's interesting, even going back to the Hegelian e-girls, I think the whole idea of dialectics is related to why this is sort of a mistake. It's also related to nominalism, I think. So caveat, my disagreement with nominalism is that I don't think particular objects exist either. But I think talking about how universals don't exist is pretty cool. So it's like distancing ourselves from our concepts. And similarly in dialectics, it's all about how, things that seem to be opposite are really helping to constitute each other. That's also related to dependent origination in Buddhism. I always want to say this. Pratitya samutpada, right? Like, things receive, like, what seems to be the essence of something, the reason why we refer to it as a thing, it comes from somewhere else, right? Like, there's a person I refer to, whatever, Napoleon. But like, Napoleon had people, right, that Napoleon came from. There's a whole bunch of shit that goes into it, right? But, we call it out as a concept because, like, then we have individual associations with that. Anyway, so the point is, like, this is true also of, bad social structures or whatever. So this goes back to the whole thing where, like, yeah, democracy is a sham. Like, the whole point of, like, telling people official things is to, like, make people feel like they're invested and to, like, build trust, right? That's basically, you want people to be trusting and you want people to fulfill their promises. But that means that in a way, you want people to be naive. You want people to remain children. This is what I call enchodification. I haven't written my article about this, so there's nothing about this. It's funny. There is something here. Yeah, but nothing too much. But anyway, so going back to ahimsa. So as I was saying before, in terms of, not looking at things in terms of war, but in terms of emergency response. And this is like, what are our councils doing? Like, what are we here to do? Right? Like, we're responding to a broader situation. But then what are the sorts of means that we might use? So ahimsa, I think, is relevant, like, at whatever level you think that there is a community, like, you would want to apply this. It means something like nonviolence. And it's like, you don't want to be harmful. But see, this is where like it gets very subjective, right? Because it's like, well, what constitutes harm? This is the kind of thing that people don't talk about, right? People don't like get into the nitty gritty on like, well, what does it mean? I guess people do. But anyway, it's like the point is that there's not one answer, right? It can't be said once and for all. What does it mean to help and what does it mean to harm? But I think what is most helpful is like the beauty of the engagement that we can have once we accept that. Once we stop expecting words to be perfect and to map onto things, and we accept that there's something messy going on here, but kind of magical. Anyway, so the thing is here, right? So according to Gandhi, right, ahimsa is not just about avoiding inflicting physical injuries, but also mental states like evil thoughts and hatreds and unkind behavior, such as harsh words, dishonesty, and lying. So this, I think, is good. Like, people have called into my radio show being like, people are lying to us. We need to talk about the truth. And I want to sit there being like, the truth is more complicated. Like, it's a philosophically complicated thing. But, there is also the element of deception. So I think being deceptive is like not good practice. But, and this goes back into zero trust, like people always could be being deceptive. And it also ties into cosmology in general with the idea that there's something deceptive about the idea of incarnation in general, that the absolute or God has to sort of forget that it's God and sort of lie to the world and lie to itself in order to be able to have the experience that we're having now. But so that's fun. That reminds me a lot of just like Hegel in general as well. But so the whole idea of experimental counsel is just like this fractal like engagement. It is basically I'm inviting you to form your own group. And I think anybody is qualified to do this. It just depends like what is your ambition and what tasks are you going to set for yourself, So the first thing to think about is, what are you interested in? What is drawing your passion? What things in the outside world, do you have a hard time? Like, what do you ruminate about? Like, what can you not stop thinking about? Like, I will have it a lot that it's like, oh, I'm thinking about some family dynamic, or I'm thinking about like, oh my God, like something happening in the world and I'm not doing anything, So fundamentally, like I worry about, or like, where am I going to get money? Right. So it's like, making it in the world, family things and social feedback that I've gotten. Now I feel like a bad person or whatever, that's troubling, or just painful dynamics, being mistreated, or, managing people's expectations, or, just taking all this in and being overwhelmed. And then, right, like then also stuff in the world, right? But then getting interested in world stuff, obviously it overlaps with our personal dynamics. So we can start to study the things that can't happen to us in our lives, right? Like if you like, then you can start like looking at the different dynamics that helped make you who you are, and and learn about like, oh, like whatever country or political thing, conflict that you're interested in, you can learn about it, and you can learn about the kinds of people that you would have agreed with more and what they said in the past and all this interesting stuff. And then, so what I think we're all are called to do is, number one, to find other people who are interested in similar kinds of things. Also, like, even if you never read philosophy or whoever you are, like, it's really just about finding friends and really just maintain. I'm thinking of the ignorant schoolmaster here, because I just want to impress upon you that the sky is the limit, that like you can think and have experiences. You have experiences all the time that are beyond all the limitations that other people might put on you. And we have all the ability in the world to continue to try and get this resonance going. At the same time, right, as much as there's positive vibes, right, are supposed to be going out, and this is very relevant. Kumbaya, right, world peace, right. But the whole thing is with that, all that stuff is that it's so important for us to be paying attention to like the things that are harder to look at. The kinds of things that reflect poorly on us. People talk about, oh, we're complicit. So much of our language for all these sorts of things is judgmental. So in addition to like, oh, we want to be like, if you want to be positive or whatever, it needs to be grounded in where you're at, right? Where you actually are. So for example, going back again to this whole idea of a counsel, right? So if your counsel is built off of just how people present themselves, you know, and oh, we met online. I mean, I think you can be honest and authentic and figure it out, but it's about like how honest are people willing to be? You don't have to say everything, but it's like, you know, what do you understand the risks to be? And losing my train of thought here. Oh, right. Basically, it's like we're also all changing as well, and we can be honest about that, even as we're trying to do stuff together. But I'm basically saying that I'm melding things together. This is something that's reminding me of the law of one, funnily enough. But I mean, I've also thought about experimental unit in terms of the union of egoists, which is from Max Stirner. So that is an idea of like the egoist, right, is serving themselves. But in a union of egoists, right, you're coming together to like go to the bar or play a game or whatever it is. And so your self-interest or whatever, like your service to yourselves comes together for a collective activity. So basically, the idea is that, you know, serving yourself and serving other people don't have to be contradictory. And what is, you know, coming up in our world today is that it is imperative for us to make this the case and to increasingly realize that this is the case. And to the extent that, you know, a social compact or whatever is not built on the idea that, you know, serving yourself is the same as serving other people, and that, you know, serving other people is like helping them serve themselves and serve other people, and so on and so forth. To the extent society's not built on something like that, everybody's gonna fucking die, right? Everybody's gonna die because you basically just have the Hobbesian trap, right? So the situation that I'm anticipating is, you know, billions of people are gonna die in climate change or whatever, you know, so a lot of people are gonna die. So now we're down to 100,000 people or whatever. What's gonna happen? Those people are gonna tear each other apart due to distrust. And it's basically going to be, you know, a planetary battle royale, and people are just going to fight to the death, and everybody's going to die, right? So that is what we're dealing with. It's funny, battle royale does not even come close to coming. I wanted to talk about the movie, right? Also similar to Highlander. But so, like, you know, if we can't establish something, not necessarily establish trust, but like if we can't deal with the Hobbesian trap, like it will kill us all, because the distrust dynamic does not disappear when there are more people. And so once your common enemy, you have exterminated them, then, you know, the internal enemy becomes the new enemy, and like the internal domestic sphere divides, and now all of a sudden somebody that was an in group while we were fighting the rest of the world or whatever is now an out group, now that they're the only people left, right? So it's like we need to understand that that dynamic plays out over and over and over again, and it's very predictable. It's as predictable as it is hard to stop, right? Because in order to address these things, like we have to get into everybody's heart, right? You have to basically establish very deep, you know, connections of mutual influence that nobody escapes, right? Which is a harsh way to put it or something, but it's like, it's not, everybody should basically be included, right? And should be able to feel like they don't have to hurt anybody in order to feel secure, or in order to feel like they're making a difference or making their mark on things. So I'm just going to run through this and see, because I'm running out of time now. So I'm just going to see what else I might have here. So let's see. We have Misanthropocene. So the reason why I liked this is that Misanthropocene is like an example of an artwork, which is very ambitious in terms of concept, right? It's like creating new figures. It's like anthropomorphizing, like, you know, all these huge things. So it's in conversation with the huge things going on in the world, at the same time as there are also songs about people dying because of drug addiction or being pregnant, right? It's very personal, or being in love, right? So it's very personal at the same time as it's like, this is happening on a planetary scale. And that's basically a kind of mindset I think is super important. So it's like, as we engage each other one-on-one, as we encounter the other, right? It's like, on the one hand, it's like, okay, you have some fucking bullshit drama you're going to take out on me, and you're going to like blame me for shit. It's not my problem because you're projecting. And it's, but okay. It's like, but then like everybody does that. It's going to happen. It's worth it. We can still like people still have love, but then also it's like there's a huge fucking world out here. Like, what are we doing about nuclear war? Like, I think any relationship which doesn't have a strong basis in a common perspective on nuclear war and like what is being done to, and not just nuclear war, but just destructive conflict, like drone conflict or genetic engineering or artificial intelligence, right? If a relationship is not built on a common approach to those things, it's built on it's a house built on sand, right? So it's the kind of thing where it's like, oh, you married somebody and you disagree about having children. That's what I think this is, right? Because the way that we engage with culture and technology, how we express ourselves, how we bring our hearts to bear on like the planetary stage, that's our gender, right? That is more important than sexual reproduction. Okay, so when we're talking about a council, when you're talking about meeting together with people and you want to talk about things, like, so it's like we're managing, you know, like even as people, it's like, oh, I have all these philosophical ideas, but then I have all this emotional stuff going on, you know, like I need to be maintained and serviced, right? We service each other emotionally with things like phatic language, right? And so we need to like build up those capacities. It's like, this is basically something that you say, not for its own sake, but again, to like establish or maintain social, like you ask people how they're doing, right? You know, you're nice, you know, you humor people, right? But that's good. Like we basically need to learn how to humor each other so that we don't kill each other. Anyway, so I'm not getting through all these things. So yeah, we have Anthropocene, so I wanted to say that. So Weltschmerz. So this is basically a concept from German, which means pain about the world. So this is related again to Misanthropocene, but also like where we're all coming from in terms of establishing a council. So like in terms of how to form your own experimental council, you basically like I think best to start with one other person. But if you have like two people that you trust a lot or that you feel really close to, like first of all, I'm so fucking jealous. But second of all, you know, if you have whatever feels manageable, basically. But so you get together with people that you really care about, and you basically say, you know, I want to, you know, talk in a new way. I mean, you maybe already talk about world issues and things, but this is like complete all of these that to the extent that you haven't done them, right? So it's like you're talking about world issues. You're talking about the things that are like on your mind. You know, you're talking about the identity categories that are associated with you. You know, if you're trans or if you're Christian or whatever, you know, like the thing, or if you're considered male, you know, like you go through all of this and you basically sort of like touch base, you debrief, sort of. You're bringing everything up. Like think about it almost like you're going to a therapist for the first time. And so, like, what would you think to say to somebody who like really cared what was going on with you and where your mind was at? So obviously, you can take that slow. But, you know, you want to connect that in. You want to get into all this emotional nitty gritty and like open up about, you know, whatever. And you also want to be providing a non-judgmental atmosphere for the other person. So it's very important that as we establish councils and intimacy, really, emotional, intellectual, like a council is a place where like fucking badasses like hold court and enjoy, you know, emotional and intellectual intimacy, basically. Because it's like, you know, like whatever, like you could discuss philosophy with somebody that you disagree with politically, but you can't sit there and start, you know, making moves, right? Because you just, that's what I would say, you're not in emotional intimacy, right? It's also, you could also talk about intellectual. Anyway, I'm just trying to defend my use of all these intimacy terms. But so, like referring to this, like talking about our pain, the way that we've experienced the pain of the world is an important part of this. So I brought up Weltschmerz. And I also have Zeitgeist. So I actually have a whole like German term. I'm half German, so I have a German thing called Zeitgeist, Weltschmerz, Gesamtkunstwerk, Blitzkrieg. So this is also something related to a German nationalist, but there's something called Gesamtkunstwerk. So I would basically like, I don't know. I'm self-conscious because a lot of this shit, like some of my things come from whatever, you know, Wagner or whatever. I just want to say I've never listened to Wagner. I don't fucking care. Like, I don't care about, you know, ethnicity. Anyway, so, but other people do, right? So I think ethnicity is interesting because it's like we care about the people that we, you know, are descended from. I was just looking at my haplogroup today, right? H11A. Great for me, right? But so like to the extent that we just care about people because they're related to us and we want to like keep that alive, that's great. But if you think like, oh, the only people that matter are people of my ethnicity, anyway, miss me with that shit. So I basically think like I'm really not, I'm not a nationalist anyway. But so anyways, Gesamtkunstwerk is basically, this relates also to the idea of the total social fact that I was mentioning earlier. So it's like a total work of art is basically like for Wagner, it was something that incorporated all media, right? Where it's like an opera has singing and dancing and theater and choreography, and I'm repeating myself, but it has music and painting on the sets, and all this stuff goes into it, and so it's a total production. But so also architecture is involved. You're creating a whole space, right? Or a movie, but also sort of us doing things in the world it's doing a total work of art, because what we are doing is we're creating a project and we are bringing all of our creative faculties to bear on it. So like whether you can paint or when we talk, in a way you could say everything that we do is being instrumentalized, but the fact that it's an artwork like makes that instrument like it's in a way not being instrumental. It's being de-instrumentalized in a way, because so much of what's going on in our world is that so many things are, it's like we've already thought things out and we've put labels on things. So it's like hard to use things for new purposes because the sense of what they are, and that includes us, right? Our sense of what we are is so ingrained by like the weight of history and blood feuds and mass media and, constant socialization and, early childhood experiences and so on. Anyways, so the idea is Zeitgeist, Zeitgeist, Weltschmerz. So like the Zeitgeist is sort of like the spirit of the age. So the spirit of the age is the pain of the world, right? So like this pain this aspect of the pain of the world that we all experience, like our grappling with that is the Zeitgeist, right? And so we all have our share. And so the problem is like we basically think that in order to process our share, other people don't get to do theirs. So it's like, I suffered, but some people are like, colonization makes people suffer. So that in a way, it shuts down the conversation about like, okay, well, what has the people that you're calling colonizers, like what's their share of the world pain? And how is that important? That's the kind of thing that people will become allergic to talking about. And you can pick whatever words you want, right? You can talk about terrorists, right? Like, what is the terrorists' share of the world pain? What is the Joint Chiefs, right? What is the military? What is the billionaires? What is the drug addicts, right? Whoever the fuck it is you want to talk about, right? This thinking about it in this way, where it's like there is just the world, and the world has pain, and we're parts of the world, and so we have parts of the world pain. Anyway. So that's the Zeitgeist. So increasingly, I think we're coming to an awareness that everybody experiences this pain of the world very directly. And this is coming to a head in terms of blows or building up the sort of intimacy, like full spectrum intimacy, which enables us to counsel up. So as I mentioned, new gods, very important from Anthropocene, tying into the idea of the Übermensch. So like a council or pantheon, as I'm talking, it's sort of like it's a league of Übermenschen, right? But it shouldn't be elitist, right? Like, because like what is supposed to make us so wise and so amazing as like great people or something is that, we are processing, our aspect of the world pain, and we're becoming creative. We're burning down the door, right? That's a line from Wild Time by Wise Blood, right? We are burning down the door. That's where it's like, in terms of like, war or whatever. It's like, yeah, if burning down the door is violent, then I'm sorry, but like here we come, right? Because it's sort of like I have one like this. It's like in On the Wall, right? Which also has problematic, ironic, Nazi references. But anyway, at the end of the wall, right, that says like, after all, people are walking around outside the wall trying to get into your closed off heart. And so some stagger and fall because it's not easy to bang in your heart against some mad bugger's wall. right? So it's like, oh, like you have, like, that's where, like, my point of view is a little bit aggressive or something, where it's like, oh, like you have emotional defenses. Like you think it's up to you that, like, you get to wall yourself off and, like, nobody's going to figure out how to influence you. And that's where it's like, no, 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 no. All hands on deck. This is where, like, it's a total emergency and a total work of art, where it's like, we will. I mean, it's funny because the whole aestheticization, this is a funny thing in terms of the aestheticization of politics. Although, there's also just, the politicization of aesthetics. So, whatever one is virtuous, that's the one I'm doing. So, like, again, this is also related to, the whole anxiety around fascism. And so, alternatively, politicization, art is ultimately subordinate to political life. I mean, these conceptual distinctions are untenable. Like, the problem with all of this, and, like, the reason why this never goes anywhere is because, like, if the coherence of what you're saying relies on a clean conceptual split between art and political life, then I'm sorry, like, it's incoherent. Like, it doesn't work. It's built on sand because art and political life can't be distinguished. And that's building up to, like, I mentioned him before, but, Beyond the Pale is a book by Ben Zweibelson. So if you want to get into, trying to, getting more into military theory, you're getting into the hard-nosed, disciplined, we're going to do stuff together. This is really cool stuff to read because he's talking about how military thinking can become very backward and stuck in, like, old ways of looking at things. And they introduce you to a lot of cool stuff that you can think about for your clandestine, experimental council. It could be a secret society, right? You don't have to tell anybody. But on the other hand, like, do you really trust the other people in your secret society not to tell anybody? So, like, anyway, so it's basically like you're making a club, you're making an affinity group. But anyway, so again, art and political life, like here, Ben Zweibelson critiques something called Newtonianism. So this is so funny. This sentence is so great. Human reality is constituted by discrete entities with distinct properties. Right. So here's the good news. You don't live in human reality. Human is a bullshit concept. Reality is a bullshit concept. And then what's funny about this is that it's basically telling you the idea of discrete entities is a bullshit concept. So in Newtonianism, you could think about it one way, but once you get into, quantum mechanics and relativity, all of a sudden things that seem like they're completely separate objects, all of a sudden they're overlapping and, like, weird shit's going on. And so, like, that's really cool because, like, think about that when it comes to things like nation states. Are there really discrete nation states? I basically tell you no. So this is where, the creative interpretation and analysis of the situation comes into play, because it has to do with what are the sorts of tasks you can even set yourself. And, like, even if, such a task can't be achieved directly, what we can do is be communicating about our tasks. How are you ever going to achieve anything if you can't talk to somebody about it? So, like, that's why I call them experimental councils, right? They're councils that in a way come together to experiment. And that's why they're not defined by, the workers or some idea of class, or they're not, like, I like Baudrillard, but they're not called, like, forget about that. Like, experiment is supposed to be something that everybody can do. You can also think about it in terms of play, right? So you can think about play council. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Like, it can be casual, and it can also be, like, very serious business. Like, again, we have here Beyond the Pale. This is by somebody who's in the Space Force, right? This is an Army person. Or then, again, getting into influence operations. Like, I've started to play my game, and I've picked on, some special people within the armed forces. I already mentioned Ben Zweibelson, but also, Julianne Galina. Like, feel free, when you form your experimental council, feel free to reach out to Julianne Galina, the deputy director for digital innovation at CIA, right? But so, like, in terms of this, going back to, like, the council communists, like, they wouldn't work with trade unions or political parties. Like, we don't even see that. Like, in terms of the CIA, it's not like, I think the correct political position, it's not that I'm against the CIA, it's that there is no CIA, right? Like, all of these terms are just like labels. Like what really matters are people who care about each other and who will make promises to each other and keep them, right? Who will not lie to each other. That's what matters. And I don't care if there's people who all work for the CIA. If they lie to each other, they are not part of a unitary sovereign, right? There's just no way, because a unitary actor can't be internally deceptive. Anyway, so like what really matters are like what are the unions of egoists, right? What are the experimental councils that exist within CIA? So what we're trying to do is then understand we're agglomerating and other people are also agglomerating. And so we are trying to influence the people who are agglomerating. And then what I have to basically say about it is that if you can get people to this experimental, the idea of emergency instead of war, then you can basically make it to where all of these groups are going to wind up being able to interface because they're all refining their ability to do so. Like we're simultaneously building up our ability to resist people who won't stop being mean. But at the same time, we are also continually keeping alive the idea that the people who are currently being mean could one day not be mean and will be friends and will be able to move on and be grateful for everything that's happened, even as it's terrible. So it's basically a lot. But a lot of this is what I'm projecting onto it. The basic experimental council form, you can just obviously rip me off and do whatever the heck you want to do, right? Oh, this is something where I was thinking of basically there's a quote about the Velvet Underground and Nico where, oh, nice. I think Brian Eno said it. So like not many people bought a copy of this album, Velvet Underground and Nico, but Brian Eno said everybody who did started a band. So that's the idea. Like, I'm not trying to create something that's, it doesn't need to be super famous, right? All it needs to do is inspire people and then you run with it. And then it's not my thing, but like I played a part in not empowering you, but inspiring you. And again, when it comes, I said before, the ignorant schoolmaster. That's where it's like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's going on with you. You're probably never going to counsel with me. You're invited, but like, a lot, again, goes back to sacrificial transparency, right? Like it's a sacrifice to me. I understand that. Not that sacrifice. And that's okay. But so the ignorant schoolmaster is basically there to remind you that you can educate yourself. You have the ability. You're smart, right? You have the ability to do a lot of things. And so I'm reminding you that you can, and you can find company. And this is a good way to not be alone, right? To talk about the things that are really important to us, figure out our own feelings about it. Again, internal refinement, greater jihad. And then we can bring those things to discussion and we can talk about the heavy feelings. We can talk about the memories that we think about at night. We can talk about, the difficulty of the political situation. We can talk about, Anyways, so we'll keep going. It's like Vishnu, New Gods. We talked about this. Oh, there's also something that. Oh man, I always do this wrong. So there's also this. So like part of me wants to make an article that's about Heidegger, tying together Heidegger and Grimes through this idea of only a God can save us, because that's in the lyrics to New Gods. Right, where I shared that before, where C sings that only brand new gods can save me. It's basically very similar here. Interesting, like switch over between the singular and plural, between God and me and the first person. But anyway, Heidegger, in addition to being a Nazi, and again, that's not the purpose of this video. I've spoken extensively in previous videos about Nazism, and that conversation is not over. But I just want to let you know I don't know, like I'm not avoiding that forever or something. It's just not what this is about at this very moment. But I'm obviously going to tie it in now that I've spoken about it so much. Anyway, in addition to that, Heidegger, he's basically talking about planetary technicity. The encounter between technicity on the planetary level and modern man. So that's the way Heidegger's sort of talking about it. And I think that's a really good way of talking about it, because again, going back to the, Hobbesian trap, people have been distrusting each other. Why do we have to fix this? This is where people are like, human nature, right? There's always going to be war. It's like, okay, well, if there's always going to be war, we're all going to die, right? Because it's fundamentally the rock in a hard place is like, yeah, this is the way we've always been. We've been hurting each other, whatever. Nobody's perfect, blah, blah, blah. And over here we have like all of our increasing power because of the increasing strength of technology. And so the basic problem is that it's untenable. Like the ability to have all this destructive technological power present, it's basically like, you're having a huge argument, but you're putting a lot of guns in the room. Like it just makes the situation more dangerous, and if it keeps going on and on and on, like it's going to kill everyone. And that's just how it is. So dealing with this issue of like the implications of disruptive, this has a Wikipedia page, disruptive innovation is what it's called. So like disruptive technology. So like mega technologies are bringing our conflicts to a head, and the tools that we have to use are, insights that we've gleaned, like cultural artifacts, our stories, our feelings, the ways in which like our lives are relatable to other people, as well as political philosophies. All those are the tools that we can use. So when I like apply, like I would want to make an experimental council which is focused on, making use of we call it cultural capital or whatever of the world's religions and spiritualities. That's where, again, I think it was powerful to build things into each other and find people willing to rep that, and then just like actually operate together. Again, I think it's a problem that probably a lot of the people who are driven to like become visible or whatever, like they are going to lie to you and they're not going to be all about really what it is. But anyway, that's where I feel like the hope is. And in a way, it's better to like establish this sort of council like in the shadows. Like it's all well and good, with this thing on Twitter and, all these internet personalities. Like it would be cool for people who are famous or whatever to form councils. But in a way, it works even better from the bottom up. But from what I've seen from the grassroots organizing that I've seen, like a lot of it is not helping people form council. It's not helping people self-organize. Like there is some of that in terms of like food distributions or whatever, but like it doesn't help people think for themselves. Like all that happens in like a lot of discourse is that like a certain perceptual frame, like all that's happening is certain language codes are applied. Like something like this is genocide's happening, or this is degeneracy, or we're being invaded or whatever. Like people have all these things, and they like when they think about talking about the big picture issues, it's in a way it's already decided, because all that you've decided is that like there's somebody who's the enemy. There's some people who count, and like we were doing fine, and we naturalize our position, right? We were doing fine as though the world was created for us. Obviously, people have that, but the world was created for all of us, right? That's the problem, not just you. And like it's also for all of our own good, because if we can all operate that way, as though the world is for all of us and not just us, we'll actually be better off. We'll actually be happier, even in a narcissistic, whatever, self-interested way. We actually will also be happier. Anyway, so let's see. There's probably more to this. So again, new gods. So going on about Grimes, obviously talking about Weltschmerz, Zeitgeist, I pray, but the world burns. You can't give me what I want. This is also a really good line, because it's basically saying what I want is for my own beauty to shine, or whatever. Like there's a lot of ways to interpret this. That's why it's great poetry. But like some part of what I'm thinking about is that it's like, I don't know. Like I feel like somebody can give you encouragement and validation, and all that means a lot. But that's not ultimately what I want, right? Because what I want is to not feel encumbered. I want to feel able to express myself. I'm reminding myself of George Bataille, who talks about sovereignty in a way where it's like, every impulse that you have should find an expression. That doesn't mean that it should be like the immediate impulse. It just means there should be something. And so when we're not able to satisfy those impulses, we'll get neurotic. And maybe, anyway, point of it was, what we want is to be in that way free. We want to feel like we are doing what we want to do all the time. And that's not something that somebody else can give you. Like it's something that it's in the way that like, it's funny to think about the idea of the kingdom of God is at hand, with the ideas of Heidegger's of ready to hand and present to hand. But it's like, the world to come or whatever. It's there for us all to make, but we need to make it together. But that also means like it's not just for other people to figure out how to build it. We also have to contribute our piece, right? So in that sense, it's not us being given it, right? Because in the same way, like in terms of what we want, right, is a better world or whatever. So you can't give me that because we all have to be a part of building that. So even as much as it's something that I'm receiving the inputs of everybody else is also receiving my input, right? So what I want is to be able to fulfill my function, right? I want to it's like I don't know. It's reminding me of sneezing or other bodily functions, right? Where it's like, I want what is supposed to be coming out of me to come out. And ultimately, I think like a lot of times when we feel depressed or whatever, we feel stopped up or we feel deterred, right? We feel like we can't do what it is we want to do. But I'm running out of time. So Malcolm X, freedom is something you will decide to live more freely. This ties into gratuitous freedom from Afro-pessimism. I think I get into that. But I go on about this. I compare Grimes to Afro-pessimism here. So the sound of the end of the world. This is another aspect of Misanthropocene. And so that's also really interesting. Like the idea that, our sense of what the world is coming to an end. So like our ontological parameters, like the way, not just, but see, this is really interesting. This ties into a theme, again, from transcommunism in the transpolitical age. Where I'm talking about how Baudrillard distinguishes like biological death from symbolic death or an engagement with radical indeterminacy. But so in a way, like that's good news, right? Because it means nobody has to die. But like it's not actually easier. It's still a very agonizing process. It's like it's like you don't have to die. You just have to do a mushroom trip or something, but that can be really freaking intense. So in terms of the end of the world, it's not that buildings have to be destroyed, but it is that, in a certain sense, concepts need to be destroyed, or as Baudrillard would say, even signs must burn. But it has to happen in a way that actually is ultimately for the good of everybody. And it's not just motivated by you trying to destroy a sign system that is unfair to you so you can make one which is unfair to somebody else. Because that quality of motivation, again, is dog shit and leads to everybody dying. So as I understand it, in Afro-pessimism, the idea of going over to disorder, trying to end the idea of worldness or something, it's sort of like not overthrowing this idea of these determinate categories and that we have to resolve, things have to be perfectly understandable, because that our projection of why it is impossible, like why languages always leave something unfulfilled, why you can't just perfectly say what's the truth or something. Like if we get paranoid about that, if we think that there's something wrong with like the imperfection of communication or something like that, then we're going to blame it on somebody. And so the Afro-pessimism is all about how we blame this on Black people. But that can happen to a different group. And in a way, I think it does happen to everybody. But there's a lot that I have to say about Afro-pessimism. Black Baudrillard, pretty interesting. Yeah. A lot of this is not too related to the idea of councils. This is about how, things attain a symbolic value, though. Wow, yeah, I weirdly went on a lot of tangents here. Yeah, a lot of this is not relevant. So, in terms of forming your experimental council, again, I think you can take some inspiration from this thesis 116 from Society of Spectacle about the idea that, this is not that. Anyway, or maybe it is. I don't know. I don't know what I'm quoting here. Anyways, it's like part of it, Baudrillard is saying like the proletariat needs to become the class of consciousness or something. So I don't agree with the idea of class, but it's basically, again, this idea that like what we're doing is we're refining ourselves, we're improving our ideas, we're opening ourselves up to new interpretations, we're understanding that, language can be very rigid, and like we probably are overly attached emotionally to certain ways of framing things, and we can start to experiment with letting that go. And even, and then the other thing is, again, taking the ceiling off of our social relations. Like, you are really important. Like, you're as important as anybody else in the entire world. And so what you and your friends decide to do is very important. And so what I'm basically talking about is, like, whoever you are who's listening to this, whether you're in the CIA or you're in the FBI or the NSS or whatever, or you're just some random fucking person, right, who's just like watching YouTube videos, like, yeah, like, your loyalties are important. Like, it matters a lot to me whether you want to kill anybody, or whether you think it would be better if anybody was dead, or whether you're happy to be born. Like, it matters to me whether you are happy to be born, and whether you would would you create the world as it exists, like, if you had the chance. Like, that's important to me. And if, like, you're dissatisfied with your user experience, like, I would love to help you with that. Anyway, but ultimately, like, we have to help ourselves, right? So this is basically something I'm making to try and inspire people. And if you think something's interesting about what I'm saying, please do just run with it. There's also so much more here. I guess I can talk about another day. But as I said, I generated these protocols. And actually, oh dear. Oh, wow. I thought it would come up. But yeah, a lot of these they're labeled as protocols. So, like, first order protocols, but then there's other ones. Emergency response. So yeah, like AE protocols. So those are built off of a document that's here. So you can see that in more condensed version right here through any one of those, like, articles. And so this is basically, again, just sort of like this would basically be ideas to ways to run experimental council. Because as much as, okay, we mentioned, I guess I got to go through this. So we mentioned council communism. There's also the idea of a spokes council. It could be called consensus decision making. But a spokes council is also associated sometimes with indigenous people. That's funny. That's a term to figure out how to replace. But there's different people who are basically speaking for another group, which is behind them. And then, like, even those other people can be there, so they're still accountable at the time. So that's a pretty cool way, again, to sort of bring different groups together and try and have top level conversations that help us then move together. So there's that. But then, of course, there's also things like the National Security Council here in the quote unquote United States of America, right? So this is, again, like, councils are serious business, right? And there's also, right, there's the United Nations Security Council. So these are, like, I want everybody to be inspired and know that, like, your council or your, like, group decision making that you start could wind up being as important. Like, in a way, it already is as important as these security councils, right? But, like, we can have extremely powerful influence. Like, it again goes back again sort of to the Matrix of, like, free your mind, right? But, like, I have a whole lot of ideas. You can look at them, but, like, the point for me is not, like, you need to, like, think what I think. Like, all I'm trying to do is, like, talk to you about why, like, the different ways people normally talk about social problems don't really do it for me, and to offer you some of my ideas. But ultimately, like, in your experimental council, like, I want you to try and practice building up emotional intimacy. Emotional and intellectual intimacy, I think, go together, but they also help sort of provide a framing for each other. So, emotional intimacy, those conversations can be kind of hard. We're talking about hard stuff. And then intellectual is more like, oh, our political opinions. And we can, like, bond in a superficial way because, like, oh, those people don't get it. Ha ha ha. But, like, in any case, whether we're talking about our feelings or we're talking about emotions or philosophy or whatever, like what's most interesting is to just be honest about what are we grappling with at the moment? Where is that? And then like by struggling through that, like I anticipate it's also not easy to communicate. So like allow for that and don't just expect to be able to communicate super clearly, but keep at it and start to really notice when like you use words differently than other people, or when they use it differently than you. And even another thing that I would say about counseling is like, even as you're talking with somebody, you're also having a meta conversation at the same time. So like, even as much as we're sitting here talking about where we're gonna, whatever, have, yeah, like where are we gonna have dinner, right? Like that's a council decision. We're deciding together. But like, say you get a little snippy with me and it hurts my feelings, right? So even as we are, um, talking about the thing that we're trying to decide about, things might come up that we need to address about our conversational style while we're in the middle of the conversation. So it's really important to like be able to jump between different topics as well as between different like levels of conversation, if that makes sense. Between like, like the topic at hand and then like the meta level of like talking about the conversation that we're already having. So I am losing steam. I guess I want to make sure. Let's see if there's anything else here that I want to get to. I've talked about Ben Zweibelsen before. Lebenskünstler is also another German term. It means somebody who makes their whole life into a work of art. I think it also has the connotation of somebody who like looks on the bright side, because it almost makes me think of found materials. It's like somebody who can turn anything into art. So no matter what it is, however bad it is, it's like we can turn this into a mode of expression. We can make this beautiful, or we can find what is beautiful in this, basically, no matter what it is. Whether you're talking, again, and when I'm talking about what we have to find, right, we have our traumas. We have emotional violence. We have wars. We have holocausts, right? Like that is what we find. Those are our found materials. And this reminds me again of, Walter Benjamin in The Spirit of the Angel of History, right? History is just a big freaking storm. That's a big cluster, whatever, and there's a lot of pain. But so making art out of life is not to, not look at that pain, but to embrace, like realize that in a way, like what's so beautiful about the world is being able to have these experiences that feel meaningful because of the cost and the pain and like the way in which understanding is hard won. This concept of something being hard won, or being able to receive like that it can't respond to everything, but in the togetherness that we do find, in a way, that is the point of everything. It's hard to explain, but I'm running out of time. So total work of art, we already have this. And as I already say, like there's a way in which everybody is already in experimental unit. So so again, my cosmology is like we all created the world together. And at the beginning of end of time, we all agree, and then we start the cycle over again. So in that way, like the world is already planned. Like it's already put together by a council that we're all on. And I also think we will all be each other. So like eventually I will be you. So like in that sense, there's not really a council because there's really only one person, right? But, this is speaking at the level of conventional reality or something, whatever. So in that way, like everybody's already included. The question is just like we need to follow our artistic sensibilities and just keep it going, basically. It's another way of reframing. It's to see like we don't need a big change. We just need to keep on with where this is headed, but we can reframe like where this has always been headed. Like we've always been on this collision course with planetary society and technology and confronting like distrust and and uncertainty. Like we've always been on that collision course, and we can embrace that instead of hiding our head under the sand and clinging to like old dogmas or little group dynamics where it's like whatever people think is popular, like making it out to be such a big deal, right? If somebody's not cool right now, or like if they're problematic, and it's like those things obviously all matter, but like there's a really big picture here that like no conceptual framework can adequately grasp. And it's really important to display that intellectual humility in order to try and build up that, like that opens up vulnerability, and that allows then for connection where we're sort of bonding as, broken people or whatever. But we are still thinking, we're still smart, like we can still come back to joy and laughter and pop culture references and whatever. But being able to sit there in like that harrowing, I think about it as like corrosive joy. It's like we're covered in battery acid. Like until you're like lying there in battery acid, like on fire, like in hell, basically, like realizing like the depth of emotional suffering can be very deep. And like we have a really hard time acknowledging that to each other. And being able to go there and like start there. Anyway, you don't have to do that. But just like it's something to think about. Like you can get closer and closer to that and you'll feel more genuinely connected, basically, as opposed to like if it's very superficial, it's almost like the crust, right, of the earth, but there's the magma underneath, right? So I mean, it can seem really stable, but then like you might be because you're not really being upfront about some of the emotional dynamics or whatever involved, eventually like you'll be torn apart, right? Just like continents separate or something like this, right? Because you're not actually once again, back to the house built on sand thing. But I mean, there's no guarantee that just because you start to talk about difficult things that, you'll trust each other forever and whatever. All I'm saying is that, like, I think that's part of what the game is that we're here to play. Like, and the stakes of it make it even more beautiful. Like the fact that it's like, oh, the world is on the line, but, we need to talk about how we're awkward and cringe or whatever. Like, it's so great. Like that dynamic of feeling like, how can it be that, I feel like I'm a stupid person. Like people don't think I'm cool. But how can it be that like the minutia about my life and my lore and my self-talk, how could that be world historical? And like, that is the exact thing that like, yes, that fucking matters. Right. And that is why, it's so important who you talk to and what is the intention that you put into that. And also keep in mind, like, you're going to continue to be a secret agent. Like I can't be upfront with you about everything. Right? Even if I want to, and I don't have the time, it's tricky. So like keep that in mind, right? You're not ultimately going to necessarily be able to tell everybody everything, but being able to get there and like take those risks and build up those, what we're moving toward total love, right? Because what is total love? Like somebody that you don't have secrets from, you're developing a common sense of purpose. You're willing to stand together in the view of other people. You're willing to accept consequences together. Ultimately, the most profound consequences. In a way, that's very joyous. But like, it doesn't mean we have to run into self-destruction or risking or, label anybody as an enemy or whatever, like, or use harsh words, although I probably am guilty of that. But it's like, to be able to have that kind of fun, in other words, to play experimental unit, there's the intensity is all coming from our investment, right? It doesn't have to be anything intense outwardly, but it very much is a sense of being adventurous and willing to bare our souls to a certain extent. Mention this. People at the table. Oh, that's funny. I misspelled this. Talked about Percy Shelley. Oh, right. So Percy Shelley has a concept called the epic poet. So the basic idea is like, in addition to thinking about it as an Ubermensch or a new god, like you can also think about it as epic poets. So it's like in the future, everybody's an epic poet. Like we all have our own movies. All have poetry. We all have music. We all have this. And so we all have the capacity to have these huge, mega high bandwidth emotional expressions. And poets is also associated with law, right? In Percy Shelley, he says that they give law. So like we all have our own political philosophies that are all like really brilliant, and they are all work together. So that's like something called the highway of the consistent. That's in Poe. I don't know if it's going to come up. But so the highway of the consistent, it basically means like what is most amazing is not just like how great any one thing is, but how well it works together with other things. So is it not wonderful that they should have failed to deduce from the works of God the vitally momentous consideration that a perfect consistency can be nothing but absolute truth? How plain, how rapid our progress since the late announcement of this proposition. So basically, just like, I don't co-sign all this about absolute truth or whatever, but it's like perfect consistency. Like, we all fit together. We don't have to fight this. You know, we can accept that these are the people that we have to deal with, and we can make it work, basically. But also, like, part of what that has to do with is that we're all, this is what I mean by we're going Super Saiyan, right? We're becoming epic poets, right? So like everybody can have a YouTube channel. Everybody can have a Substack. Everybody can, you know, review movies, right? Everybody can be an athlete, right? We're all doing all these things. Like, you're probably noticing, like, everybody's doing everything. It's like we're all leveling up into these epic poets. But again, like, to contra the idea of elitism, like, ultimately, like, what makes us, I think, the sensibility that we discover as epic poets is that, you know, we do want to reach out to everyone. Like, we understand that, like, we wouldn't be ourselves without everything being the way it is. And so in a way, we owe a debt, and we have gratitude for everything. And so for that reason, we love everything, and we want to see to our love. We care for what we love, and we want, you know, to care for it, to protect it, to help it flourish. Obviously, those things can, you know, the intention can become misguided and whatever, but like, that's what this is all about, right? Like, of course, we're going to fuck it up, and then we're going to, you know, counsel with each other, and we're going to improve, right? But, you know, it's like, I'm thinking about the thing from The Dark Knight where he's like, we're a small organization, but we got room for rapid expansion. Like, the world is kindling. The world is ready for experimental units, for experimental councils to spread like wildfire. And so that's what this is. The idea is that you, like other people, you're going to be one of the 10,000 that's going to start your own band. So I want you to start your own council, and you don't have to tell anybody about it, but just like start deepening your conversations along the lines, and start thinking of yourself as an epic poet. You know, like, what kind of movie would you make? You know, what would your album title be? What, you know, what would your painting style be? Or like, I mean, you're going to have all of them, but like, start developing your creative ideas, because you're a genius, right? Like, that's the thing. Like, you're important. And I guess I don't mean to be mean about it, but like, yeah, you're a genius. It's like wonderful. And like, the world is aching. The world is begging to hear from you. But in order to do that, we need to become grounded by, you know, going into our own pain, going into our own interests, developing ourselves, trusting ourselves enough to say, fuck what you heard, right? About all these social norms and expectations people have. What do they know, right? They don't know anything, right? So, like, yeah, explore your depths. We'll do it. So, yeah, Artists Union. So, yeah, we're collaborating. So, yeah, thank you to everybody who's been listening. Thank you if you have already started an experimental council. Thank you for everybody who is not getting in touch because of Dark Forest Protocol. And I'd like to thank everybody for helping to co-create a world in which I can learn to love love. Thank you for listening.